and at some level they just know. We all know.
Mm.
We all know that the quest of the masculine is for the woman's hand in marriage at the softest, the deepest, most respectful, most honoring levels.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. We're diving straight into why equality has killed polarity and why that matters so much for us, for men and women, for connection. So, we all know the statistics around divorce. They're above half now of marriages end up in divorce. There's some new stats coming from Pew that say that men that are looking for short and long-term relationships are down 11% from just 4 years ago. So there's something going on. And to really dive into this, I have here with me Igor Vasilevitsky. He is a fellow first-generation immigrant from the Soviet Union. And most importantly, he's the founder of Holistic Life Counseling. He's in Australia right now, and I came across Igor's writing first in his work, and it just hit me so abruptly. It hit me to my core. He has this uncanny way of depicting the interplay and dynamics of men and women and the desires between the masculine and the feminine to a place where it just feels so real and it makes so much sense. It's so juicy. And the big thing that we really uncover here, I'm so excited for you guys to hear about this, is why it's so important for us to separate our personalities from our desire for polarity and how that will help us when we're dating, when we're relating, when we're in partnership. So listen in. We covered that. And we also talk about why men love hierarchies, why Hollywood is ignoring the mature masculine, why it turns out that disasters bring people together, and why the rigid masculine is the way he is, that authoritative masculine figure that we all know, like where that comes from. And this will all kind of help us really uncover what men and women crave. So this episode was so beautiful. I hope you all enjoy it as much as I did recording it. Igor Vasilevitsky. Hi.
Hello, and thank you for that really kind introduction. Thank you.
Of course. I'm so excited to dive in. I know you just got so much wisdom to share. Every time you post something, I'm always like, shit, that like hit me deeply. And it's very, very moving. And, in order to jump in, I kind of would love to kind of ground us and the audience and everyone listening in you and your journey through this and into your masculine psyche and how you kind of navigated. And so kind of to start, I have here a couple of testimonials from some of your clients. So Igor has about 20 years plus of experience. He has helped so many people throughout his tenure. And here are a couple of things that people say, which I think is just so beautiful. He has a raw sincerity and gentle yet firm masculine holding. His presence holding on all levels, bullseye intuition. His approach is very compassionate. And these things to me are just like so profound. And it's because not a lot of people associate those things with masculinity in our general culture. So I'm curious kind of how you got here to have these kinds of testimonials and what your journey's been like.
Yeah, okay. Where to begin? Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there was a spontaneous thing that kind of that I yearned for and drew me down that pathway, or just a hell of a lot of my own personal issues and a heightened awareness of the issues. But yeah, I just kind of went on this journey, and through spirituality, through psychotherapy, and kind of looked for ways of marrying the two. And at a certain point, I recognized, more to the point, I suppose, I recognized, first of all, the multidimensionality of my consciousness. So being aware that, let's say, for example, what's true at the personality level isn't what's true at the polarity level, which is the masculine and feminine, or at the soul level or the essence level. There are other rules at play, but they're equally valid. They're equally truthful. And one of the things that I find is lacking out there is this kind of absolutism about this rule or this approach or this methodology or technique to working. this plus that equals codependent attachment or something
Mm,
like that.
mm,
And it's like, yeah, well, on one level, but on another level, it's actually completely true and healthy.
mm,
It's like, how do we hold the spectrum of different levels of consciousness, some that are sometimes contradictory to one another in the
mm,
same consciousness or in the same relationship with another person as
right,
equally valid?
right.
And so in my own journey of unpacking that in myself and kind of going, oh, this doesn't make sense. What does? Oh, this does. So that and that is both relevant, both appropriate, both true.
Mm,
And in my personal journey in terms of specifically polarity, it's kind of been more raised with a very developed, I would say, feminine.
yeah,
So a lot of those things that you mentioned in the testimonials are in a lot of ways, some of them are feminine, or at least you pointed to the feminine aspects of the
right.
softness, passion, the empathy, um, the felt sense, the being with somebody in their pain or in their suffering, and
Yeah.
that. But I didn't really have a very healthy masculine, and
Mm,
then at the same time, I didn't really see any healthy masculine out there, which is in my perspective, to a large extent, a big epidemic at the moment with males. It's like you either get indoctrinated into the toxic old masculine or you get feminized.
right.
So what the hell is this deeper masculine?
Mm,
And I didn't really have an external teacher, an external compass. And so I went on this, I guess, in a journey around finding or discovering what the hell that meant. What is
mm,
this actually clean, healthy, masculine that we talk about or we read about, but
yeah.
how do you learn that? How do you be that
Yeah.
without understanding it from your mind and acting it, which a lot
Yeah.
of people do. And so in that journey, it's like as the insight started to unfold and as the changes started to happen within me, and then as I noticed experientially how different I was with people, that I was able to be solid and
Mm,
firm and holding and supportive and penetrative and provisioning, but from a place of softness and love and compassion and heart, that's when I
yeah.
started to see more of that dynamic apply between the masculine and the feminine within me, within my own consciousness. And so
Mhm.
a lot of the writings I think that drew you perhaps to inviting me on comes from that place of just me stumbling within my own journey, within my own consciousness into this, like, oh my God, this feels so true, on this level, at least of my development. And
Mm,
it felt so right to put it out there. I mean, writing an articulation of truth or what I discovered to be truth is something that I'm very inspiration. I feel very inspired by, and that is what I end up
yeah.
doing, and that is what also ends up happening in sessions with clients when I work with them. Quite often, I learn, I get taught in the way on the fly as I work with a person, these insights, we just stumble into them together. And it's like, I'll say something and I'm like, that is as new for me as it is for you.
Mm,
You know? And it's like, can I share that as a truth? And most of the time people want that shared because it is in a way an uncharted territory of the psyche that I think a lot of people now are discovering. And I'm one of those people that have, I suppose, chosen, I guess, on some level to go on this journey. A lot of times I
yeah.
haven't been choosing. I think I've been dragged kicking and screaming, to be honest. But um, it is what it is.
Yeah. Thank you. That's really beautiful. I feel you. I also didn't really see healthy masculine as a child, and I think that's what drives my desire to have these conversations and just help men and women find each other in a way that is balanced and fruitful for both of them. And so, when it comes to unhealthy expressions of masculine, I think that would be a great place to kind of go, because I think people listening to the show, they're dating, they're meeting different types of people, and they're finding patterns. And I think
Hmm.
it would be great to kind of discuss and explore. I'd love to hear your perspective, because I feel just kind of coming from former Soviet Union, immigrating here in the early 90s. Yeah, like, you know, just rigid, hostile, scary masculine, that I felt scared a lot of the time when I was a kid. and not to the point of like crazy violent aggression, but I wasn't like comfortable to be myself. That's for sure. And I
Mhm.
find that some other women that I've met throughout my journey that have had similar experiences have also kind of developed this need to overperform, overdo, overprove. And those are some of the patterns that I've noticed. And I'm curious, like what you've noticed and the differences between how men and women grow up with those kinds of authoritative masculine presences.
Yeah. Yeah, great question. Big topic. I mean, I'm the same as you, as we were talking before. We hit record as, coming from the Soviet Union and having that really rigid masculine role model that's quite scary and confronting. And in a way, a symbol and a symbol of the what we now see as or coin as toxic masculine or alpha
Yeah.
masculine or something like
Yeah.
that. Now, of course, you and I have the privilege of living in a first world country.
Yeah.
We're safe enough in our base pyramid needs of survival to explore self-realization at the top, right? To reflect on the composition of our psyche, of our parents' psyche, of the cultural psyche, and pull it apart. They didn't. And for them, it was about survival, and I think that's important to honor.
Yeah.
And they gave us this opportunity, but they came from, a survival base, a survival drive for themselves and for us.
Yeah.
Their parents were in the war, for God's sakes. So that masculine is very much about, well, I am going to provide, right? But out of survival, and I don't care who has to die in the way. I don't care which feelings get repressed in the way. I just have to make sure they're fed, yeah,
Yeah.
and they're clothed, and they're educated, because that means survival. So I'm going to beat them up, or I'm going to yell at them, or I'm going to be aggressive, so
Yeah.
that they survive. That's actually what's behind it. It's
Yeah.
still the masculine impulse. The intention, still at the core, is still fruitful. That's the
Mm,
thing. And so, for example, in my context, in my family, it's like when I started to connect to the deeper understandings and the deeper intuitions and the deeper connection to the masculine energy, I started to see that flow even through what we call toxic
yeah.
individuals. So those that were normally I would experience, for example, at times my father, the
Totally.
criticism, let's say.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, I felt the impulse for my development and my embetterment and my pushing out into the world and all these positive things behind that, sitting behind that.
Yeah.
At the same time, that's not a cop out. That's not like to codon it and to say, why am I saying that word wrong?
Condone. Condone.
Condone. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, at the same time, it's not to condone that behavior. It's like, well, it's great that we recognize good intentions, but
Sure.
it's like the behavior is still toxic on all these other levels and it's still damaging, right? So if we have the opportunity for developing relationships, for developing ourselves, then how do we work through it, right? So your question was about authority.
Yeah.
So that authority comes from, okay, I got to take charge here at
Yeah.
all costs
Yeah.
because survival's at stake.
Yeah.
I don't have time to stop and ask Anna about her emotions because I have to get her away from the oncoming truck right now,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
kind of that's what's playing out.
Mm,
However, when there is no truck,
right.
and Anna wants to cross the road, then being that way is damaging to her.
Yeah.
So sorry, I'm using you as a
Oh, I love
example.
it. So true. Yeah.
Yeah. So what is clean authority then? Oh, well, that's the question. It's like how do we connect to a healthy, clean authority
Yeah.
from the deeper masculine? What exactly is that? How does it feel different? How does it look different? Well, the first thing is, in my experience, is that authority, comes from this quiet confidence and trust.
Mm,
So the opposite is I don't trust that the
mm,
universe has got our backs. I got to take charge here. Oh my God, I got to control. I got to dominate,
right.
to save, to protect, right?
Right.
Healthy authority is like, comes from this surrendered trust, which is the feminine,
Mm,
and the quiet, deep confidence of like in myself that I've got this situation. I've got it. I can step in. I can take authority. Right, you do this, you do that. But there's a quiet confidence and trust that things are going to be okay. Right, so it's that quiet, strong, masculine presence that you just trust innately because it's calm. It's not
yeah,
panicking. It's not
totally.
aggressive. It's directive, but it's
Yeah.
also got this calmness to it.
Mm,
It's qualitatively very different,
right.
right?
Is
But to
that
get there, you
go
have
for it?
to, but to get there, you do have to go also through the route of the feminine surrender into trust that
Mm,
things really are going to be okay. Otherwise, I can't get to my masculine authority of confidence because the confidence is in me, in my capacity, but also in the universe.
wow, that's
Go
really,
ahead.
yeah, that makes sense. As you're speaking, it makes me think of like, because women always say, I just want to be seen. I just want him to see me, right? And so with that authoritative darker end, it's like there's no space for that. But it seems like with the from the healthier side, there's a space for seeing the feminine creatures around you. Is that kind of true?
Well, yeah, you're not tunnel visioning for survival here anymore.
Mm,
You have more space and time to actually admire,
mm,
right? If you're not surviving, you can stop and turn around and admire the roses by the wayside. It's the same thing with the
right,
feminine. You can admire her radiance, her aroma, her beauty,
right,
because you still know things are going to be okay.
right.
You
That's
don't have to panic. You're not in the constant state of panic. And I just need to make sure she's alive,
yeah.
right? Rather than take time to deeply see her.
Mm, I love that. You know what's interesting? This makes me think of so one of the big topics in culture, we talk about like men and vulnerability, and we talk about, what that looks like when men express that. And so I've been hearing a lot of people talking about how, you know, they're kind of two different ways that I've seen men go, and neither of them work when it comes to coming home from work. For example, they've had a hard day. So one of the ways they'll respond is by, hey, how was your day? Fine, nothing, everything, ignore.
Mhm.
And then the other way is like, it was terrible, I had this happen, help me, right? Like seeking that help from the feminine, for the feminine to fix it. And either both ways like don't work. And so that's where the conversation comes in, where like men having men in their lives, right, that they can call on to support them. And so this conversation of like why men are confused about vulnerability in what it actually looks like. So I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Um, I mean, I think there's a place for, again, masculine and feminine, right? So
Yeah.
we all have that, and of course, a man who is purely in his masculine is, well, kind of psychopathic. There is no empathy. It's all about goal orientation. It's all about outcome,
Mm,
you know. And so, yeah, we all have vulnerability. We all have emotions. Who, when we're connected to it, usually our partners are seeking emotional attunement and
right.
connection and understanding, not just to receive and hear them, but they want to know where we're at in the space
Mm,
often. So I don't subscribe to the polarity teachings of masculine men being just in the masculine, women just being in
totally.
the feminine, to polarize the most. I don't really buy into that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So
Cool.
I think the connection of the man to be able to drop in and express and articulate, but not even necessarily that. Often with the women where they're asking, where are you at or what's happening, is because they
Right.
can't even feel the
Right.
other person's emotional presence there. So at
Right.
least they want to hear it to connect to it. Well,
Right.
if a person's connected to it, in my experience in relationships, if
Right.
I'm connected to myself and I'm connected therefore to my partner energetically and emotionally, we
Mm,
know oh, it's like you're here and I'm there, you know.
yeah.
There's no it's not necessary to unpack necessarily these things
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah.
It's just about having connection at that level, at not
Mm,
just at the practical, physical, sacred, intellectual, but also in the emotional sphere.
Love that. That's really great because I think, in that like classic traditional, I must not burden others, right? That masculine thinking
Mm-hmm.
that's like, I have to handle all of this. I can't burden others. They sometimes won't even speak about that. And so there's, like you said, there's no feeling. And so what that presence does is it unlocks sexual attraction. So I think that's what ends up happening, where a lot of times that's just what I've heard. And I'm curious, like your perspective with couples that you've worked with, where there's months, maybe years of like not expressing. And so the sexual attraction kind of dwindles and goes away. And
Mm.
I think men are struggle with that.
Well, on the burden thing, there is some truth and wisdom to a healthy aspect of that, as I've found, right? So it's like,
Okay.
yes, there's the unhealthy ego kind of going like, well, I'm going to be a burden and I can't allow myself to be that on the other person, otherwise they'll leave me, which is
Right.
usually childhood trauma anyway for both men and women,
Yep.
actually, in my experience. But from the masculine perspective, the masculine is the thing that holds, right? And what is holding? Holding is a set of boundaries, energetic boundaries, physical boundaries. It's my domain, it's my castle, it's my fortress, which the feminine can feel safe to be in and surrendered because she's protected, right? So what is that in so what does that mean in terms of the emotional, right? So if we look at the emotional, if we recognize the emotional as the feminine and
Yeah.
the masculine as, let's say, the practical, the
Yep.
protective, right? These two energies within us. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's up to the masculine to hold and contain and give structure to the emotional aspect, right?
Mm.
So my emotions are coming up, and if I'm just going to be constantly blurting it out and just be a pile of goo, because I always have emotions moving, we all do.
Yeah.
That's that's not tenable in a relationship. Then both people are in a constant workshop of constantly sorting the emotions out, and a lot of people I see are like that. They go through the spiritual kind of dogmatic thing around, oh, that's what am I feeling in the moment, and it's your turn
Mm.
to express and to feel, this over processing. Where's the masculine? The masculine needs to kind of go, well, a master of his own domain might feel emotions, different parts coming up, but it doesn't
Yeah.
have to listen to every one of them and pay attention and get lost in them and
Yeah.
sink in the swamp of it. And so he goes, maybe he goes, not now. That's not repression.
Mm.
That's containment and compartmentalization, which is necessary not only for living life practically, but also for giving space to his woman.
Yeah.
If she's coming with all these emotions, he can and he's like, oh, but I'm also in all of my emotions. As opposed to kind of going, well, okay, cool. I'm going to be present to you. I'm
Yeah.
going to deal with this piece later.
Yeah.
You or with men or whatever. So there is truth to, I'm not going to burden you, not quite, I'm afraid to say anything to burden you, but
Yeah.
I'm going to not just dump everything on you either.
Yeah.
And that capacity is masculine in my experience, to create
Yeah.
those boundaries and holding and to be the king of your consciousness.
Mm.
It's like in the movies when we see the king come into court, right? And before that, there's everyone's whispering, talking about
Yep.
the king, blah, blah. And he comes in, and all of a sudden, there's silence.
Yeah.
That's what king consciousness is in the psyche. It arrives, and all these parts and all these warring factions,
Mm.
the king brings order to that.
Yeah.
A person who is together is quite can be stoic, can be emotionally open, because
Yeah.
the other aspect, the extreme of it, is the repression, where you
Totally.
forget about all that. That's the old unhealthy, controlling but survivalist masculine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, anyway, I've gone on many different
I love
tangents.
it. That's so great. Okay, so in your experience working with men, have you noticed a profound difference in the men that have other men in their lives that they're deeply connected to and the men that don't, and how they work through their emotions? I'm curious.
Yeah, there's men that belong to men's groups, men's
Right.
circles, men's retreats, and
Right.
um And it also depends on what kind of men they connect with, that
Yeah.
they engage with, because a lot of men have toxic connections,
Right.
um, and so negative influences. And then there are some men that have an outlet in these men's circles and men's groups, and they have, a healthy relationship, I suppose, to um, be able to distinguish between what to share in relationship with your partner
Yeah.
and what becomes for them men's work to be to take
Mm,
to the men and to work through it there. I mean, it's
mm.
not a necessity in my experience to
Okay.
have that.
Yeah.
Men who are emotionally intelligent enough are able to either sort things out by themselves or bring things to their partner.
Yep.
At times, confide in someone else.
Right.
Uh, but I think, yeah, it is helpful to have men's circles as support for sure.
Love that. Yeah. Um, I'm super curious. I would love to kind of go back to our conversation around the authoritarian kind of Soviet masculine thing that we talked about. And I mentioned like the female perspective on that and like what happens sometimes with the women just anecdotally that I've known in my life. I could probably count on like 15 or 20 that have had similar experiences and have kind of presented their lives in the same way. Um, I'm curious why boys kind of act differently than girls when they have an experience of that kind of harsh, authoritative masculine. I'm curious, like, if you've noticed a difference in how they grow up, in the sense of like what I've seen, just in my experience personally, is the boys will try to mimic their dad, as opposed to the girls, which honestly just feel sad about it and don't know how to deal with their lives. So I'm curious if you've noticed a pattern or what that is and why that happens that way.
Uh, you know, personally, I haven't.
Okay.
Be- like in my experience, for example,
Yeah.
I went the other way.
Okay.
I went, there's no way I'm going to be like that,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So, so my wounding was different in a way of like cutting myself off from my masculine connection to the world,
Right. Right.
because it's like, well, if that's what the masculine means, there's no way I'm going to be that. I would rather be associated with the feminine. And so a lot of
Mm,
men are in that camp, So it's
true.
like their identification is more with being a woman or wanting to be a
True.
woman,
That's
or
fascinating.
deep down within their psyche. And so
Mm,
they're cut off from the masculine and their healing and work is done in a different way.
sure.
Some become more like, yeah, this is the way that I have to be, or I want to be, or that's the only way to be, you know, and I'm going to do that, or I'm going to honor my male lineage to be that, or I'm going to be close to my father by being that.
Yeah. Right.
So I think it depends on so many different influences, and
Yeah.
also the nature of the child. I do believe that we come in with certain predispositions and certain ways. We're not a blank slate, is what
Totally.
I'm trying to say. So
Cool.
uh, have some agency in the choice that we make from that soul level kind of place, not consciously, obviously, but yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, oh my gosh, just that you speaking on this, it's like sparking so many things. Like I've heard, my dad, for example, and other men that I've known, say things like, you know, my dad was this and that and lots of horrible things. And then right
Mhm.
after the horrible things, he was amazing. He's my idol. I love him so much. I'm just, it's like you hear that and you're like, whoa, can you not hear yourself?
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Well, I think we're all complicated. We're all,
Yeah.
we're so contradictory because of these multiple levels of dimensions within our consciousness.
Yeah.
Because on some level, of course, we cannot not love on some level our
Right.
parents,
Right.
because they held the archetype of the ideal masculine and feminine for us.
Yep.
And we felt it and we saw it, we connected to it, we looked at them with adoring eyes,
Yeah, we did.
you know. And then there were all these other layers of humanity that came in on top of it, which was either good or bad, depending, right?
Mm,
So there is this multidimensionality. And again, the more whole we become, to me, that wholeness is more like, now I understand I'm this depth of consciousness, the spectrum of, and I can understand this level and that level, and therefore I can hold it all together. rather than have it in conflict with each other or try to make sense or find one truth or
Yeah,
that sort of thing. Then we can, yeah, I think we can live more peacefully, with our parents. But this isn't just in. I know we're talking in the Russian context, but in my
totally.
experience, it's across all cultures.
Yeah.
Like, I think
Yeah.
it's more intense and pronounced where you and I are from, for sure.
Yeah.
It's just there's more intensity there because of the intense nature of the background and the hostility and the wars, and for many different cultural
Totally.
factors created that. But I certainly see that with the much more laid back Australians that I work with,
Ah,
let's say, here in
yeah.
Australia.
Cool.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So interesting. Yeah, I think, as we're all healing, we kind of move into different places where we, of course, start to see our parents in a way that they're just, human. And that's definitely been my journey, and coming back to a beautiful relationship with them after many years of dealing with myself and all my issues. So I feel that's kind of why I came back here to Dallas to do that. And so
Mhm.
it's beautiful. I think it's the needs conversation around, like, when you no longer, you can meet your own needs for validation, and then suddenly you don't need that from them. Is that kind of most people's experience?
I think that's one of the healings. Sure.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's like, oh, let's say, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting conversation because there's also different levels and dimensions to healing. On the one hand, it's like, well, I can get to a place where I can meet my certain needs, they don't need to.
Right.
Or my partner can meet certain needs, they don't need to. On another level, if you look at, for example, Christianity with communion or Judaism with bar mitzvahs and bat
Yep.
mitzvahs,
Yep.
right? That esoterically, originally, that transition was all about taking the projection of the archetype of the masculine, the father and the mother of the parents of the flawed human beings, and putting it where it belongs, up in the sky, and
Mm,
having a relationship there. We never really go through this process, and so we continue to hold human fallible limited parents to the perfectionist ideal of these archetypes.
mm,
And then we're like,
mm.
you're not meeting my needs, you need to accept me. It's like, why should they accept you? They're limited. They've got these blinkers on, they've got tunnel vision, and you've just gone and done the spiritual journey, and we don't understand what the hell that is, right?
Right.
How do we put that acceptance there? And so there's that level of needs meeting that we can transition to, from them to divine connections. But there's also this depth of dropping beyond this sort of personality, me needs, my inner child needs, to the depth, let's say, of the masculine feminine polarity, right?
Yep.
So on that level, the masculine doesn't need, oh, my parents, didn't pat me on the head then, I need my needs met now, this validation or whatever. The masculine's more about, like, how can I serve? I want to
Yeah.
serve. And if I'm not serving, if I'm not providing, if I'm not protecting, if I'm not loving, if I'm not holding the feminine and the family and the community and the village, my need's not being met. And that's a much deeper need.
Mm,
And these kind of little needs that we often talk about, these emotional needs, right?
yep.
So a lot of times couples are with me, or individuals in relationships are with me, and they're like, yeah, but my nonviolent communication says I need to also have my needs heard and my feelings validated and all this sort of stuff. They
Yeah.
point at these theories, and I'm like, dude, drop beyond, deeper than that.
Mm,
As an example,
yeah.
what's the real need there? It's like, yeah, actually, I love her to love her. Well, when she's coming to you with this pain, rather than going, what about my pain? Can
Mm,
you be there with love for her pain, not about you?
mm.
Because that's going to meet, ironically, that's going to meet your need at a deeper level, right? It's like, it
Yeah.
depends which level and dimension that we go to around healing, in answer to your question. And everybody's different, everybody's a different stage. And, it's
Yeah.
my job as that, whoever, whatever I am to them, to try to attune and find the next piece that helps them live life in a more content, fulfilling way.
Wow. Thank you for going there, because I was literally going to go there before you said that. So I actually have had two. I love anecdotes because I just think people like get it so quickly around just personal day-to-day stories. So I've had two stories this week specifically. One where a gentleman was telling me that, you know, his wife's cat, it's their cat, essentially needed all this surgery, needed all this, like, anyway. He said that the greatest joy of his week, of his month, has been to be able to just pay for those bills. Like, it was his greatest joy to like know that he can handle those bills, he can take care of this animal, and she's like happy. Like, he didn't care how much it cost, like $6,000 for this cat. And that was one story. The second story is I had a girlfriend basically tell me that something happened with her computer, and the guy that she's dating just essentially bought her a new computer and just gave it to her, right? And she's kind of like a lot of women that I've experienced, right? Like, we've had this like masculine wound, this inability to receive, thinking that we're a burden, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so for her to just share with me that she could tell that by her just accepting this, he was so fulfilled in his needs. And I think a lot of women don't really feel this about men. So I'm curious what Igor's just shaking his head for everyone that's listening. Not shaking his
Nodding,
head, sorry, he's
nodding.
nodding. The
I'm
word
nodding,
nodding, he's nodding his head.
yeah. Absolutely. That's really what I mean. A part of that is probably culture, the way culture's evolved, especially in the
Mm,
West, I would say. Is at
mm,
fault about the me, narcissistic kind of thing and the equality thing, equating everything, equalizing things, the genders,
yeah,
the polarities along with them and
yeah.
everything else. So, then things become more about, well, I should pay for myself, and I
Mm,
guess I look after myself because then it's equal. Why should the other person do that? Why should I become a burden and gold digger
yeah,
stereotypes, whatever?
yeah.
But it's like, no, it's incredibly, on a certain level, again, this is the kicker here though. At a certain level, it's true too, at the personality level. We can't getting into like I think I made a post about polarity quite recently,
Yeah.
and somebody commented saying, "But isn't that codependence?" And I thought about that, and I just really dropped into it. I'm like, well, yes and no. It's like, at what level are we looking here? At the personality level, yeah, we can't become reliant on each other because it turns into codependence because there's a
Sure.
woundedness there that gets
Sure.
fed each other. So yeah, we should strive and help each other to develop healthy sense of ego, healthy sense of self and personality, where it's self-reliant, it's self also regulating, soothing. At the same time, on a deeper level, we want the dance of the masculine and the feminine. We
Mm,
deeply desire, these archetypes desire to live through us, right? The
right.
princess in the woman wants to be romanced by the knight in the man during
Yeah.
the court phase.
Yeah.
So does the king and the queen. They want to relate in those ways. And anybody who I work with, eventually, most of the time straight away, but eventually will come to those deeper needs and those deeper longings upon which the
Mm.
personality sits. Please remind me the question because I think I went on a tangent again.
No, I love the question. I love what you just said because those are
Yeah.
beautiful things to think about. Princesses and queens and all that stuff. The question was, why do women these
Mhm.
days have such a hard time seeing men in their need to provide in that way? Like, that those needs are being filled by them providing. Like, that's all it is.
Yeah, well, I do think, again, I mean, partly if we look at probably historically and culturally, it's like that women's empowerment thing that went a bit extreme or
Yeah.
went a bit too masculine. It's like, we can provide for ourselves. We don't need men to abuse us and control us and repress us and hold money over us. So we can do
Yeah.
it ourselves. Great.
Yeah.
Of course, yes, you can. And it's like, it's been proven. And it's like, yes, but the feminine power is actually in the surrender, in the trust, in being held. And at a deeper level, these women do want that, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, but on the flip side of it, a lot of men have gone onto this ultra independence thing too, and into
Yeah.
narcissism too, into the equality thing too. And so they struggle to express some of this stuff,
Right.
right? So that's what you're talking about there. Why do they struggle to see it? Now, what I found that's quite interesting though, is that some of these more traditional roles and values, like where you and I are from, even though there's a lot of toxicity, there's a lot of polarity still that's playing out in a
Mm,
way that has been homogenized and equalized and centralized in the West.
yeah,
So the man will still look after the women. They'll still be chivalrous and open doors for them. They won't let them pay.
totally. Totally.
So there is an aspect of it that to me is beautiful, and I think we
Yeah.
need to acknowledge and take from that culture, because I think it's a healthy thing.
Yeah, and you know what else that I found specific to, I'm just fascinated by like Soviet stuff. Obviously, it's where I come from, but with all their faults and all the difficulties, the men that I've found also have these really really strong deep bonds with other men,
Mm.
in the to the effect where they don't suffer from this like hyper individualist loneliness American kind of Western thing that happens, which is I feel very interesting. Is
Yeah,
that
yeah,
is that similar in Australia, do you think, that like
yeah,
kind of just
yeah, for sure.
Western thing?
For sure. I mean, what we have to look at there is this idea of individualistic countries and collectivistic countries.
Yep. Truth.
So what the Western cultures are based more on individualistic ideas, which is all about autonomy,
Hmm.
personal needs. And for that to happen, you need to separate from the tribe,
Hmm.
because that's how you get personal freedom, right? It's
Right.
like, if I can step away from my family and be free and empowered, I can make my own choices. Nobody can control me. My family can't control me. My tribe can't control me. But what's the cost of that?
Right.
I'm lonely. I'm
Yeah.
fucking lonely. I've
Yeah.
now secluded myself in my tower, right?
Mm.
As if you look at collectivistic countries, India, China, Russia, a lot of countries around the world are collectivistic. It's more
Yeah.
about not about me and my needs. It's about
Yeah.
what's good for the family and the tribe,
Totally.
right? So there's a lot of warmth, a lot of closeness,
Yeah.
a lot of more bonds, right? But the cost is
Yeah.
less individuation and differentiation,
Yeah.
less about my needs and freedom, and now I'm enmeshed, and so there's positive and negative in both. The question is, how do we harness the positive in both? How do we
Right.
create, and that was my journey. It's like coming as a foreigner to a different culture.
Yeah.
My family all like big fat Greek wedding,
Yeah.
up in each other's. There's no understanding of what boundary means
Yeah.
in
Totally.
the family, right? It's like
Totally.
I had this thought at some point, like I got to teach these Russian parents here in Australia what the hell boundaries means, because all the kids are rebelling as hell, and the parents are like, "What the hell? My kids don't love us. They don't get it."
Yes.
Right.
Come
So
teach them here too.
yeah, yeah, we should create a course together.
Yes.
Anyway, so it's like, well, so my journey was first the way to, I got to get out of the cesspool. I got to find my individual
Yeah.
identity, who I am, blah
Yeah.
blah blah, Western values, but also spiritual calling, I would say.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh my God, like, where is my family? I'm living here in, spiritual land and all this freedom. It's like, but I miss the
Mm,
bondedness and connection and devotion and dedication.
mm,
So for me, it was the same journey coming back in
yeah.
and taking the gold from that. So it's like, for me, has been the journey of finding both. It's like, how can I maintain my unique sense of self while being amongst the family, amongst the tribe, amongst the community?
I love that. That reminds me of Sebastian Junger wrote this book, Tribe. Have you read that book?
No, but I have seen it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, one of the anecdotes and one of the things he shares is just that it's a class issue as well, right? The more wealthy people get, the more they want to seclude themselves in their ivory tower. They have plenty of rooms for everyone to sleep in. People that don't have a lot of money, they sleep in the same rooms and they bond in those ways. And he talks
Mhm.
about how people report like feeling more fulfillment during like times of war and famine than they do during times of peace and
Yeah.
health, which is
Mhm.
very interesting to me. Just
Yeah,
how the
same
tribe
thing.
works.
Same thing. Yeah, same thing. I remember reading somewhere around times of disaster and crisis. All
Yeah.
these boundaries melt. People become human, neighbors and the pauper and the king, it doesn't really matter anymore. class
Yeah.
seems to just dissolve. Yeah.
Yeah. What,
Mm.
speaking of that, like when it comes to, I totally subscribe to all of the beautiful elements of, classic masculine psychology, right? The order, the logic, it's so important in our lives, like both within me and learning how to harness that and also like appreciating it out in the world. What is it about the masculine psychology that is really into hierarchies and order and logic, and what is it that drives that desire to create that kind of order, and specifically with hierarchies? I'm curious if you've thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think without some sort of order, there's no coherence. There's just
Mm,
undifferentiation, right?
mm,
It's like if there's no boundary between you and I, we're all enmeshed together. We're in a vegetative state of oneness with everything without consciousness of the fact,
right.
right? So chaos is what arises. So which is why often in polarity teachings they talk about the feminine with can be chaotic. Now
Hmm.
it's only chaotic. The feminine is only chaotic when there's no order or structure. There's no masculine to bring some order and structure.
Yeah.
Question is, how does the masculine do that? Repression, in order to contain the chaos and function somehow, is the old
Mm,
way. It's the survival way, but it's still a way of still trying to bring some kind of order and often protection and safety to the tribe, the family, the wife and
yeah.
the children,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's like I have to shut them down because we're in danger. We might get looted. I don't know, whatever, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But with the deeper masculine, the same impulse is there to create structure, containment, order, boundaries for
Mm,
the safety. But it's done in a way that's loving, with heart, with softness, with understanding, with so it's like, all right, there's all these big emotions if we look at the emotional spectrum of
hmm.
things. But I can at least go, all right, I can put boundaries here. I can look at this chunk. I'm not going to get overwhelmed by everything. People
Mm,
who are often overwhelmed are often lack the masculine ability to, in consciousness, to create structure within their emotional self.
mm.
You
I
know,
love that.
so so hierarchy and order is is necessitated by the masculine in order to create some kind of semblance of coherence in life, in consciousness, and in the world.
Yeah.
There's certain rules that need to happen in order to understand how gravity works, how science works, how
Yeah.
do we build building, how do we create um, rules by which we function. How do
Yeah.
I create my boundary to have this is where I am, this is where Anna begins, right?
Yeah.
Individuation is
Yeah.
still a masculine process, right? So in my perspective, the masculine is necessary for structure as long as it comes from that deeper place of serving and
Mm,
love and order for the feminine.
love that. Question for you. So we talked about how, the masculine feels fulfilled in providing for the needs of the feminine, really just like serving in that way. What do you think are some like really just other aspects of need that masculine psychology has, like to be fulfilled, in the sense of like, besides of course being provisional, being all of that, being all of the container like you talk about, are there certain other needs that you think are not fulfilled often for the masculine? What is he really like looking for, I think, in a greater sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's mastery is one
Okay.
thing.
Okay.
Like, how do I master my consciousness and my kingdom?
Okay.
The symbol of consciousness is kingdom often in the Western
Mm,
psyche,
mm.
right? As espoused by Carl Jung and others,
Yep.
James Hillman and stuff like that. So it's within our consciousness, this medieval archetypal mythology and cosmology, right? It's like that's my consciousness is my kingdom. How do I become a master of it? How do I rise as king within that? How do I rule within that? So it's about that self mastery, and also within consciousness, within king, because there's also the father
Yeah.
consciousness. The father is more like, oh, okay, I can rule my consciousness, but the king is also connected to the divine, to God.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's like if I'm getting guided by God to do these things, then um first of all, I'm pure in that way because any of my ego and bullshit that comes up, that's just going to force me to burn that up. Because
Mm,
anything that comes up as my ego, idealistically speaking, is going to be self-serving. I'm not serving the kingdom anymore.
yeah. Yeah.
I want the woman to do that and the children to
Yeah.
do that so that I can get what I want. This is
Ah,
more about every time it's like, no, God's telling me I have to do this, and even if it's going to hurt my ego and burn that up, right?
mm,
So for me, it's about the masculine journey. One way of looking at it is to go through that archetypal arc of the
yeah.
different archetypes, the warrior,
Yeah.
magician, lover, the prince,
Yeah.
all these different things. Get to a healthy version of each one of those.
Yeah.
Stand in the middle of the quadrant of all of them as king with connection to the divine. Be able to master self and be able to master their own domain externally in the world, whether it's creating my own kingdom or within my own family or creating an empire.
Yeah.
There's plenty of beautiful entrepreneurs with this beautiful conqueror energy and empire builder energy out
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
who create these things and make them benevolent,
Yes.
for betterment and serving of other people. And I think that's a
Mhm.
beautiful expression of the masculine right there.
I do too. I think it's so attractive, so beautiful, so desired by the women in the world. I think what's interesting is that I've met men like this. You just talked about men like this. They're out there. I think in media, we get served not that.
Oh yeah.
So for example, have you seen White Lotus?
Oh, I started watching that. No, is that good?
Okay. I mean, it's been like, yeah, I really try to be selective just because there's so much out there. And I think this is an amazing deep dive into just like people's psychology and baseline.
Mhm.
Also what I love is that each character is so dark and so light. Each character. It's
Mhm.
really well done. But I think one of the little moments that are just like I want to share is that, this young adolescent girl, maybe she's in her 20s. She's again presented with a man who is like, she says jump, he says how high, just like so the nice guy, the classic trope, the nice guy that just has zero boundaries, zero self-worth. There's a lot missing, even though he's an attractive man, right? So then she sees the bad boy archetype over on the other side, right? This guy who's just like doesn't ask for permission, just goes for things, kisses her randomly. So she ends up going off with that guy for a few days, and then he leaves her in the middle of wherever. He pulls like some unpredictable, just like I'm over you stuff, and leaves this girl. So she comes back and she goes back to the nice guy. She's only had these two options. It's frustrating that we don't have that like that deeper masculine in our media. I'm so curious about your thoughts.
100%. I've written a post right specifically about that because it's like, I mean, the way I see it
Yeah.
is that it's still in vogue to demonize the masculine,
Yeah.
you know, from a Hollywoodized perspective. So
Yeah.
it's culturally endemic to demonize the repressive patriarchy,
Yeah.
right? Which means throwing away the toxicity with the masculine rather than differentiating what is the healthy masculine. So
Mhm.
all the stereotypes in the films from Homer Simpson, right? It's like this
Yeah.
buffoon and idiot who's emotionally illiterate to, as you said, the sweet nice guy, which is actually quite popular in a lot of films right now. It's almost like I don't want to offend anyone with my masculinity, so I'm going to fold myself inwards to be at pains not to harm the woman. They're almost asexual,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the bad boys who don't care about anyone. You got that archetype. You have the dark alpha
Yeah.
stereotypes who are usually cannon fodder, for the hero, and the hero
Yep.
usually protagonist is also he's got a heart of gold somewhere in there, but he doesn't mind killing other people, and he's just like removed and aloof in a lot of ways, and he's got a dark and traumatized past as well, right?
Yeah.
So he's not available emotionally either for the woman,
Yeah.
you know. So and the fathers, even that really hurts my heart. Like watching the
Yeah,
fathers,
me
how
too.
they're displayed as this either these goofy, pathetic dad joke types,
Yeah,
or these horrible, repressive types. I
yeah,
was like, why? When are they going to actually
yeah.
praise and display versions of masculinity that are beautiful, that
Mm.
are heroic, that are leadership like, but also soft and caring and loving? And I'm sure there's some, but
Yeah,
you're right. There is definitely more of that negative exposure.
yeah. Um, I think probably when the demand changes, like in culture for what we want to see, maybe
Hmm.
things will change. Which kind of leads me to I've loved this conversation. Thank you for diving into all these places. I'm curious. So I always hear men these days, specifically in like men's work circles, talk about this phrase. They always say, the masculine, sorry, they say the feminine is the call to the masculine. And they always say that. And I'm curious what your interpretation of that is.
Um, I guess I'd have to hear the context from where it comes
Yeah,
from.
in the sense where
No,
I
I
think,
mean, a lot of ways, and I mean, there's so many ways to interpret that. It's like, yeah, that's the feminine is the life giver. It's what gives us purpose to even achieve outcomes and be goal oriented, build the highest buildings and conquer the biggest, the darkest nations. For Cleopatra's, hand in marriage, it's what
yeah,
drives us, of course, enlivens us, but on a more esoteric, inward level, it's about us rescuing the golden fleece. It's about us uncovering and rescuing the heart and the emotions and the softness with our spiritual warriorship internally and out in the world, really.
yeah,
So I think that's partly the call. But
mm,
if I had to guess, I would say it's something around that. That's what it's been like for me anyway.
yeah.
Part of my journey. Yeah.
I'm curious to hear more about that because I think that is one thing that, a lot of the women I've talked to, I did a really great workshop like a month and a half ago where it was kind of like a 101, just like some differences between men and women. It was around like motivation, like speaking style, just a couple of really important sexual differences. And I think one of the main themes was the women were just like, no, that's not true. That the whole call to the masculine, like they don't do anything for, it's not about us, right? Like that's the general sense that I've gotten from a lot of women, which is like they truly believe that the masculine, everything the masculine does is for selfish reasons. It's not about them. And I'm curious to hear your journey of coming to the place where you don't believe that, and you really do see it in a way where the feminine is the call. Curious to like just hear you expand on that.
In my experience, they do know that. It's like when you
Okay.
appeal from a deep enough place, from a
Yeah.
sincere enough place,
Mm,
then they can feel it's true. There may be barriers of pain because
mm,
their trust has been misguided so many times by men who have maybe said something similar just in order to, let's say, bed them,
right.
and so betrayed their trust. Sure, sure, that happens quite a bit,
Sure.
but the deepest of levels, when in my experience, when you appeal sincerely enough, and they can feel the sincerity of the intentions and the safety of
Mm,
your presence, it does reach. It does
mm,
reach their hearts, and at some level, they just know. We all know.
mm,
We all know that the quest of the masculine is for the woman's hand in marriage at the softest, the deepest, most respectful, most honoring levels. You
mm,
know, it's like the desire of the masculine is to claim the feminine, but not claim from a perspective of ownership and possession. But it's like I want to claim her in a way where she lives within my kingdom, so that I'm fully catering to her. I'm so devoted to her, to serving.
mm.
And it's like at the deepest of levels, we all yearn and want that. But it's edgy talking about that because we live in such a culture of like, you don't owe me. I'm separate. And it's like on some level, yeah, of course it's true. Of course, we have our
Mm,
separation as well.
yeah.
But on a deeper level, we all yearn for that level of bonding that's sacred and juicy and beautiful and polarized. And otherwise
Mm,
it's too distant. We always feel like this need for closer intimacy, and we kind of scramble on the level of emotions to get there, but this is deeper. the polarity stuff.
Mm,
Deeper.
mm.
Mm.
Wow, that's really beautiful. It was it something you just wrote actually, where you wrote about it might have been you, maybe it was someone else, but this idea of like the masculine isn't like trying to knock down her door to get inside her castle, but rather he kind of, right? You wrote that.
That was
Okay.
me.
Can you
Yeah.
explain that what you wrote? Because that was beautiful.
What did I write? Let me just look it up. Give me a
Yeah,
second
look at
here.
it.
Let me
I was
see.
like, I knew that I read that from you. I was like, gosh, this is so beautiful. Um,
Uh, yeah, yeah, no, that was a moment of insight. Where was it? Hang on.
Here, I'm gonna read it. A
Oh, you
man
got it.
that, yeah, I got it. A man that calls out a woman's protectiveness, defensiveness, and even aggressiveness when he attempts to be received by her is displacing his responsibility of becoming her protector so that she naturally lays down her shield. A man must rather respect her fortress, standing outside of it with patience and with a devoted offering of his own castle and its safety until she trusts him enough to leave hers and enter his.
Yeah. So in other words, less verbose, less poetic, um, less mythological speak, I suppose. There's this there's this vein within the inner development, self-development, spirituality movement that's all about it's like, well, the masculine's direct and he calls things as they are and calls them out. So, so what happens is, let's say is in a relationship, the woman has a wall up and the man's like, you're not receiving me. My masculine wants to penetrate. You're not receiving me. I'm calling out your defensiveness, your trauma, your childhood, those things. And I'm not responsible. I'm only responsible for my needs. Everyone's responsible for their needs, for their own healing, right? So it's spiritualizing these and completely just walking away from from humanity, for one
Yeah,
thing. It's like,
yeah,
hey, let's help each other,
yeah.
out of this fear of codependence and
Mm,
actually it's fear of intimacy and closeness is what's really going on there. But
mm,
what I'm saying in that post is when the masculine, let's say, can feel, let's say she's closed down, right? There's a shield there, there's distrust there for good reason too, usually.
yeah.
It's like if the masculine can even if he feels that there,
Mm,
it's like can he simply because she's really what she's doing is like this, like keep me safe. I
yeah.
want to be safe. I don't trust right now yet. And
Yeah.
so can he stand at the shield, at the doors of her castle, and just be patiently, lovingly waiting there? It's
Mm,
like, I'm not going to walk away to see where there's an easier access, and I'm
mm,
not going to yell at you, telling you to open up. I'm
mm,
just going to be here with this. And with enough presence and devotion to even a protective mechanism, eventually it goes by itself because she goes, oh, okay, cool. He can protect me instead of the shield. And so
right.
that goes by itself. And then he can
Mm,
step in and go, I've got you. You
yeah.
don't like, thank you for trusting me. Right.
Yeah.
So because patience is a deeper masculine virtue.
Mm,
She needs to unfold in her own time.
mm,
So penetration isn't everything. It's like penetration only when it's welcome and open, yes,
sure.
but also penetrating up to the next edge and
Mm,
then holding everything, desire, on that's real honor. That's real honor. Honor is kind of going like I'm going to protect your honor, to use that medieval terminology again,
yeah.
which means I'm going to protect your space, your sacred space. And I'm
Yeah.
going to stand here and I'm not going to be intruding and I'm going to hold back anyone else who does.
Yeah. Thank you. Very beautifully spoken. And I love how you used your medieval terminology because what it's done for me, even during this conversation, and I'm sure for everyone listening, it's brought me right back to my natural instincts. And it does that, right? Like we are so much more closely related to our medieval ancestors than we are to the computers we're looking at all day, And it helps, it helps just like for me also to claim that, yeah, like I don't want to stay in my castle by myself. I want to go in his. Like
Mm.
that's what I want deep
Mm.
down. And I know a lot of women want that. but aren't allowing themselves to admit that in this day and age.
Yeah, for fear of, I'm going to be disempowered, let's say, and I don't want to be a damsel, and I want to be empowered. It's like, that's true, but on another level. And on this level, you also desire to surrender and soften and be taken and be looked after. It's like there's nothing wrong with holding this spectrum of both. And so when I work with people, it's some are in extreme polarity and they need to develop more independence on their personality level. Some are the opposite. So it's like it depends who is where, So I think a good practitioner to find for people if they're looking to work with someone as a couple or as individuals is someone who can attune to where they're at, what are their needs, where they go, rather than somebody who's, let's say, dogmatic and it's like, this is what I teach, this is how everyone is, and that sort of thing. Yeah.
That's what's so beautiful about you and your perspective. You're able to really help people, I think, and especially in 2023, like hold, I want to go for my dreams. I want my passion and purpose to be alive in my life. And I also want to be in relationship and be cared after, like you said. And I want these different things. And so I feel like that's just a perfect segue to wrap things up. And I would love for you to, if you guys have loved hearing about this, like Igor is just such a wealth of knowledge. I feel like I've learned so much this hour. If you want to work with him, I know he has a client here in Dallas, so he works with people all over the world. So yeah, Igor, will you tell us a little bit about what you do right now? Any offerings you have coming up, please?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I work as a I just call myself a psychotherapist/healer. I mean, I do have the ability to tune in on certain psychic depths and levels, so I use that to inform my approach. So I offer one-on-one sessions as well as couples sessions. So yeah, and I have a client base that is international, as well as within Australia. So my work I do through the online kind of medium. And I do a lot of writing, so I post a lot, as you have seen.
Yeah.
Wanting to write a book at some point, hoping to find coherence to all these pieces, and that's kind of my offerings.
That's so beautiful. What's your I'm just curious now, but like what are your priorities just like creatively over the next year for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think the book would be really fantastic. I just feel really like I've landed certain things that I'm personally found and discovered and articulated. So that would be really, I think, the most satisfying. But every session I work is beautiful for me. It's like a work of, I see it as art. I mean, psychotherapy was originally an art form.
I didn't know that.
So yeah, so for me, it's really art, and every time, because the human soul is so mysterious, and you're working with, every session is completely different, and it goes where it goes, and at the end there's this beautiful wholeness to it, and honoring and a deeper understanding of the human condition, of the spiritual, condition, and so yeah, I love what I do. I just love what I do.
Wow. Your presence is beautiful. Your nuanced approach is wonderful. I'm all for more nuance in the world, less just this or that thinking and more nuance. And we're also deep and we've got so many layers. So I just love that. I'm going to add all of Igor's links to the bottom of the episode so you guys can check it out, book a call with him, and yeah, you won't be disappointed. Thank you so much for this beautiful conversation.
Hey, thank you for having me on. I love talking about this. Thank you.
Love it. Of course. All right. Till next time, you guys. Thank you.